welcome to Nicki Talks. Today I am really happy to welcome Nancy Schwoyer and Rosemary Haughton back on the show. They are two of the original founders of Wellspring House, and today we're going to be talking about the subject of hospitality. So welcome, Nancy and Rosemary.
Thank you.
Why don't we start with just kind of a general definition of hospitality? How would you define what hospitality means?
Well, we did a little investigation, and one of the interesting things is that the word of hospitality derives from, in Latin, means both guest and host.
Both guest and
so
host.
It's about really sharing a space in some way, but of course, in practice, the host is the one who organizes things, has the power to say, come in or get out, So the derivation is interesting, but it is about welcoming people.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think sharing space and resources with people, and those people include, particularly as named in some of the definitions, strangers.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that,
Yes.
as Rosemary said, sometimes, she kind of said, you open the door, you close it. There's risk taking when you have that broad definition, but. So that's how we define it, and think that it's kind of the basis of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the way that if we can share space and resources, then all people, basically have what they need, and that doesn't just mean sharing our resources, but also we are on the earth as guests, and that's also a very particular important part of hospitality right now,
especially today. I was just going to say, I love that, the concept of the two words, the host and the guest. That's just perfect. It's just perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. So to kind of pick up on what you were just saying about the land and the earth.
Yes.
How do you see the concept and really the practice of hospitality within the broader context of today's social and economic reality?
It's almost the same thing. I mean, you can't. The fact that we are all here on the earth, whether we like it or not, we are in here, and we depend on each other. And the sad thing is, of course, so many people behave as if they couldn't go it alone and they can do without other people. That phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, which of course is lovely because it's literally impossible.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
I mean, if you try,
it's literally impossible. Absolutely, it wouldn't.
Right.
So the kind of basic law of nature, it certainly is in nature in the sense of plants and animals. They're totally dependent on each other for growth in all sorts of ways.
I think one of the things, the word I think is relational.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that, it really isn't that the host is greater than the guest.
It is not.
It's not. It is relational. And oftentimes the guest becomes the host.
Mm-hmm.
And there can be many examples of that. I think certainly in our experience that has been the case. But I think that is true in some of the old stories about.
It's like the student becomes the teacher.
That's right.
Yes.
You got it. That's right.
And that story about Abraham entertaining people who turned out to be angels. I mean, it was God who was there, and he did welcome them because it was the law of humanity, which for desert dwellers, of course, is absolutely basic, because you're the one who has that tent now, but next week you might be needing a tent rather badly from someone else.
Which is universal.
Yes.
So the guest is God. The guest is all humanity.
Yes.
But then there's that wonderful interpretation or comment about this changing of roles. Mm-hmm. So that Abraham kills the calf, and he treats the strangers to the most wonderful meal, and he entertains them, and then when they leave, they become basically the host and he's the guest, because Sarah, who has been barren, is finally with child.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a a beautiful story
That's
of
perfect.
real reversal.
Yeah, it's perfect. It makes me think about, I mean, I know this is happening on many levels and many different issues, but it makes me think about the way that we treat people who are trying to come into the country for asylum and who are fleeing violence of all kinds.
That's right.
And
Exactly.
that us and them,
Yes.
mentality.
Yes.
It's the absolute opposite of how humanity should be.
One of the things Rosemary has written extensively about hospitality, and I was rereading some of her words last night. And where we are in society is we know the structures are broken.
Yes.
We know so much is broken. And what we do as a society, sadly, is we keep investing money in managing and patching up.
Like building too many shelters.
Building too many shelters.
Yeah.
Privatizing prisons.
Yeah.
Building walls. All those things. And really, that just is making, what happens is become more and more fearful. Mm-hmm. We do more and more, and we shrink and shrink and shrink our human nature and what we're called to do. Mm-hmm. And we're not saying at all that you can just kind of, we're not, well, there are risks in taking people. Yes. There are risks in them. We're not denying that. But we have to, the whole idea is don't shut doors. Begin to open doors.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful image about allowing people. We also think it's not just people, but allowing ideas to come in. And one of the things that concerns us, and I'm sure I know you, is that we don't have conversations with people whom we disagree with. We don't, and we
send them emails.
Send them emails or tweets.
We send emails or we shout or we whatever. But the real sitting down and welcoming strange ideas.
Yep.
Even though we may not agree, even though we can't, but there's just such a need for conversation.
Well, it implies the ability to engage in, respectful discourse.
That's right.
Which seems also to have wandered off somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it seems particularly at this time, it's not new. This whole thing of just being afraid of new things and wanting to hold on to things is not something but it feels to us like it's just at a really peak moment where
it does feel that way.
The concept of hospitality, and it's not just about welcoming people into one's home or it's much bigger than that, much larger than that.
Creating a neighborhood, but the fears are real.
Yes.
And you can't pretend that inviting people into your home is always easy or safe. There are risks involved.
Yes.
Sometimes really big ones, but it's so destructive when we resist that. When my kids were little, there was a sort of family rule that we welcome people, but it can go too far.
Yeah.
And some of my kids, one day, two of the young ones found an old tramp asleep in a ditch somewhere, and he was obviously homeless and so on. So they brought him home.
Of course. Of course they did.
Exactly what I'd expected.
Yeah.
And he didn't actually do any harm except cut off his beard and block off the drain in the sink. And he stayed a day or two and did some digging rather badly, and then he left. But when you start saying yes, you have to know that you maybe deal with difficulty, and you do have to think about it.
You do.
You can't just fling the doors open and say, of course, everything's fine. It may not be. When we were at Wellspring, there was sad times when we had to say, I'm sorry, you can't stay here. It was a man we loved who was an alcoholic. Mm-hmm. And when he was fine, he was a great company. Mm-hmm. But we found that he was intimidating to some of the young women. And we had to say, we loved you to come for a meal when you're sober, but you can't stay here.
Yeah, well, that's a good example. Yeah, you're opening the door, but you're doing it
that's right.
with a wise mind.
That's right.
Yeah, here's a question I've always wanted to ask you, Rosemary. It's not on the agenda. But I've never asked how you saw the connection between where you lived in England in a sort of communal setting and the founding of Wellspring. Like, how did those two things?
Well, I've been doing lecture tours in this country for a long time. It was one of the ways that I managed to contribute to a rural community that my family were involved in at that time. So it was sort of, that was on one of those tours that I met Nancy.
Yes, I remember that.
Other people who were working on education in Peabody, in the
Yes.
church in Peabody, and we became great friends, and other people in that group, and the Wellspring idea, obviously it wasn't called that then, but the idea of creating a space that we could share with other people was felt good to us, and we were people who cared about social justice and the openness
Yes.
of that kind. And I mean, you can have a mission of social justice, but what can you as an individual actually do it with?
Yeah.
And hospitality was something that everyone in the group had experienced, like taking people into their homes.
And you felt that was a little bit of a for you, a little bit of a sort of continuation of the way you'd been living in England by having the tramp in the house, for example?
I could bring some of the experience to
Yeah.
it, but it was very new. It was a different feel to it. And it carried a lot of risk, but it was so exciting and so much happened.
Yes. Yes.
Nancy and I have been working on a book about it, about that whole experience recently. And what struck us so much is looking at how it developed, how much happened in such a short time. We looked at each other and was it really so little time? But it was. And there's a sort of impetus, there's a momentum that when you're committed to something, somebody or other said committed. I think it was Goethe, but anyway, never mind. If you commit yourself, things begin to open and change. You know, once you.
It's absolutely true. I was reading just a one-line quote from Ivan Illich. Is it Illich? Ivan Illich. And it was something very simple. I don't know if I wrote it down. Oh, yeah, here it is. At heart, hospitality is simply helping another across a threshold. You know, so through all the different kinds of definitions, that's the simplest idea that you're just assisting somebody.
That's right.
And you're being a bridge.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I think, you know, I can't imagine the number of people who would say that was what Wellspring was for them. Hundreds of people. Including myself.
Yes.
When I was thinking about this show, I was thinking about how Wellspring was the turning point for me. I mean, I was, however old I was when I came there, I was probably 40, I guess, 40-ish, something like that. And I had been a secretary my whole professional life, my working life, pretty much. And I wanted so much to do something else. I wanted to be a part of making life better for people. And it started at Wellspring, and it stayed. I'm still, still kind of doing it. But I remember watching you, especially Nancy, and when you would listen to people, and you would have 800 things swirling around you, 8 million meetings to be at or to facilitate. But when you were listening to that person,
Well,
and that's what I do for a living now.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
well, you're welcome.
Listening.
And I think that's another aspect of hospitality in these days, particularly,
Yeah.
is the active listening,
Yeah.
really intentional listening. And so often when someone begins to speak, we jump in, and hospitality says, listen, and then give some sense back to people if they want it. Yes, yeah. But I was thinking what you were saying, Rosemary, about I think about hospitality in my experience, and certainly what we have experienced, what we experienced at Wellspring and experienced in all the relationships. I mean, everyone who came to Wellspring it was amazing. It was the energy, and that was it. It was the relational aspect of welcoming people in, and literally saying, we seven can't do this by ourselves. We might not have said that, but everyone who came in engaged, and the mission just expanded, and hospitality became the essence, I really believe, of Wellspring, and it is, but in its broad sense. because we did not expand bringing people simply into shelter. I mean, that's why when we listened to people who came, who crossed the threshold, and we said, come in, share life with us, be a guest, they began then, we realized that we were not going to manage this situation. We were not going to be controlled. We had to sit with the women and the men and say, here you are, here we are, what do you need that we can help with? And that, of course, led us to the expansion of, we never saw ourselves as a shelter, but it moved us to the expansion of housing, to education. And, you know, we were accused, I don't want to say accused, but people would look at me and say, why are you doing so much?
As opposed to just sheltering homeless
Why
families.
don't you concentrate on one thing that you're good at?
Oh, I bet they did.
I think that one of the concerns I have about where organizations, let's just say, are going is this language is you have to have your niche.
So don't expand.
And if you have your niche, and it can be a wonderful niche, as long as within that work, people are actively doing hospitality.
It's interesting you say that because I've been really looking into, there's a couple of different names for it, but it's sort of the hub model or wrap model, which is people working with families who need help of one kind or another. And all the different niches that they're doing it in. Now having to schedule, you know, it's not a bad thing, but having meetings, wraparound meetings, so that everybody at the table. And it's a good thing. I mean, it's effective. There's one in particular for high-risk domestic violence cases, and you got everybody at the table. So the potential victim is safer. Just by you know, you said.
And I remember that was one thing that I don't know if you recall, Nicole, but one of the things that we did at Wellspring, that exactly because we realized that sometimes the families in shelter had 10 places to go to get a piece of what they needed.
Oh, yes.
And it just seemed to be like, and then, you know,
10 places, 10 different times, and no car.
That's right, and you got it.
Yeah.
And so we began having what we call these kind of case groups, and we invited everyone who was working with the family. The family had to go to come together.
I don't remember that at all.
And we sat in the living room, and of course it was, you know, because if people need food, they go somewhere.
Yeah.
If they need education, they go somewhere.
Right.
If something's going on with their kids, they have to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And it just becomes it's how do they manage? I don't know how they manage, but I think getting people together and then with the group, and basically the family, the head of saying, this is the first thing that I need. This is what I need, and then trying to address that. I mean, it was. I think rap, whatever one calls it. I think it's absolutely essential.
Yes, I do too.
It's relational, and it's getting everyone together.
Yeah.
Because, again, it makes it easier for the people who are providing the service to the family.
And it also gets back to what I think about a lot that we've talked about is it's kind of, you know, not the idea of saying, here you need this, here you need here you need this. But taking that hospitality time, you know, that space to kind of hold the person or the family and find out what their story is and let them inform you.
That's right.
I went to a workshop at Kripalu a year ago or so, and it was about radical listening. And all of the people there were some kind of health providers, mostly from New York Presbyterian Hospital, actually. And so they were talking about radical listening with people who come in with significant medical problems.
Yes.
And the difference between, you know, put out your arm, get your blood pressure, take your blood, but to actually sit down and say, what's wrong?
That's right.
To the person, because the person is the expert.
That's right. Exactly.
It's really important.
And we always felt that, I mean, really, and we were not perfect at it at all. But any time we were going to make a change, we always made those changes based on what was it that the families, what was it that the tenants said, what is it that because people know what they need.
Yeah.
They really do know. If we will listen And then we get overwhelmed because sometimes, you know, you say it can be big what they need. But if they can express it, that's the dream. And then begin to say, where can I begin? But not just to report to people, where can I begin with your help, your support, your resources to make my dream come true.
Yeah.
And I remember women in some of the education courses and foundations, and particularly at Wellspring, saying, when they were asked about the course, this is what they said: I can dream again.
I can dream again?
I can dream again. I never thought I could dream again, but I can dream again and know that I might get my dream. But I thought that was beautiful.
It is. It's perfect.
It's about imagination. I can imagine a different future, and I'll dream it.
You know, it makes me think, partly because of the field I'm in, of people who actually don't know how to do that. I mean, they never have had the opportunity to dream in the first place.
That's right. That's right.
I remember talking to somebody one time who said, it was such a significant moment for me, but who said that growing up here in Gloucester poor, she thought for a long time, as a small child, she thought for a long time that the Open Door was kind of a fancy restaurant.
Really?
You know, and they would go as a family, and people were waiting on them,
Oh,
you know, and bringing them all this food.
Yes, yes, yes. I think Gloucester is a very, very special.
I think
very
so.
special place.
Yeah.
And I think these days we're remembering that it's a community of immigrants.
Yep. Yep.
And now we have immigrants and refugees who are welcomed into this community and have the opportunity to study English, to think about going to college. Their stories are so important.
Yes.
Their stories.
We have so much to learn from them.
There's so much to listen. But I think what beauty is that people in Gloucester, many people in Gloucester, remember their stories of being immigrants to this community and being welcomed. And that makes them very, very, most as a community, I think those are our roots. And we need to find a way to tell those stories.
Yes.
And welcome people.
Yes, absolutely.
I know there's one thing of experience at Wellspring. When my eldest daughter came to visit us, and it was a big occasion. I forget what. We were always having celebrations.
That. Yes, or a lot of big occasions.
She said, whenever I come into the house, there's so much joy.
Yeah.
That was what, and I've heard that from other people.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
There was so much going on, and sometimes it sounds chaotic.
Yes.
And what messy, you know, but it isn't. There's a dynamism. It's literally messy sometimes, but it's
well,
joyful.
Life's kind of messy after all.
It is.
Put on your apron.
Put on your apron.
Yeah. Yeah.
And share and you know, sharing food is so essential, and celebrating events in people's lives. That's all part of hospitality. And when a family left the shelter, we asked that they prepare the room for the next family that would occupy the room. And obviously, for a family who was rushing to get to their new home, the guest becomes the host. But the guest becomes the host.
That's wonderful.
And at times somebody would say, "Well, I hope you'll fix the curtain in this room because it's falling down." And if a new family, you know, they could say, but they really did. And I think that's an important thing. Seeing them clean and then seeing them remake the beds.
Yes.
And maybe putting a stuffed animal on for the next child that was coming is very, very, very special.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we did it as a sharing living space, literally. But that's not the only way to do hospitality. I mean, creating a neighborhood that is welcoming can happen, and it's the most amazing thing.
Yep. Yep.
And sometimes welcoming. Now there's a book about the Second World War. It's about a village in the southwest, right near Switzerland, that end of France, and throughout the whole occupation period, that village took in Jewish children and adults.
Yeah.
and made them part of the community and managed to dodge, inspections and so on. And the whole community was involved. I mean, that's a pretty dramatic thing to do, but there are less dramatic and equally important ways of creating a neighborhood that feels as if it belongs to everybody and can offer the kind of support that you're talking about, that you talked about.
Yeah, you don't have to be a professional.
No.
You have to be a human.
Well, I mean, when we certainly weren't professional, but we were there, and we did it together. But you can spread that as widely as you want.
Absolutely. We're running out of time, but one thing I just have to remark, I just remember people coming in, either funders or, articles, ads, whatever they were about Wellspring, and people coming in and just being shocked about what it was like, and all that noise, and all of those children, and the food, and the cooking, and the babies, and the volunteers, and loading the wood stove. And it's such a lively... What's that?
The food's so important.
Yes.
Eating together.
Yes.
And so symbolic at every level.
And the garden. And I mean, everything was... We were very, very much in touch with care of the earth. I mean, it was in our mission statement, to care for the earth.
Yes.
And you do that by making it concrete in the place where you show that you care for the earth.
Well, I was going to say, let's close with, any thoughts that you have, and I know we've discussed this already, but I was thinking about hospitality as a practice, and that you can almost do it every minute.
Oh, yes.
And to be thinking that way, I mean, it's very popular these days to be thinking about gratitude, gratitude attitude, which is great. But I think the idea of hospitality and that merging of the host and the guest, and how do you practice that in every way? Like you put money in someone else's meter?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful.
And we can do it together. I mean, at this point in history, we're at the point where we aren't sure that humanity on this planet is going to be able to survive. If there is a chance of that, it will happen because people get together and take risks and welcome each other.
Yes.
As the climate has got worse, fertile land has dried up, water is scarce. Those are causing huge migrations, and it terrifies people, and quite rightly. I mean, it is a huge, huge risk. But we can do it if we can get together, if we can shed the sense that those outside people are our enemies. It can be done. And it can only be done when people get together and begin to say yes instead of no.
Absolutely. We're out of time, so thank you both of you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Yep.
We go on and on talking about it, but it's wonderful. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.